The wind moved across Montana territory like something alive, like something searching. It carried the scent of early snow and dying grass sweeping through the scattered pines that clung to the mountainside. The sky hung low and gray, pregnant with the promise of winter's first true storm. In another month, these trails would be impassable. In another month, men would retreat to their homes and wait for spring. But Silas Mercer had no home to return to. He guided his horse, a dappled gray mare named Ash, through the outskirts of Blackwater Falls as the sun began its descent toward the jagged horizon. The town was small, maybe 200 souls at most, clustered around a single dirt road that served as both thoroughfare and gathering place. Wooden buildings leaned against each other like tired old men, their paint peeling their windows, reflecting the amber light of approaching dusk. Silas did not slow his pace. He had learned over the past 3 years that stopping meant questions. Questions meant connections. Connections meant pain. He was 42 years old, though his face carried the weight of a harder number. His hair, dark brown, shot through with premature silver, fell to his collar beneath a weathered hat that had seen better decades. A scar traced the length of his left cheek, a gift from a knife fight in a place he no longer remembered. His eyes, gray-blue like winter ice, rarely settled on anything for long, always moving, always watching. The holster at his hip carried a Colt revolver, standard issue for a United States Marshal. But if you looked closely, if the light caught it just right, you could see where the engraved words had been viciously scratched away. The metal bore deep gouges as though someone had tried to erase what the gun represented, what the man who carried it had once been. In his coat pocket, wrapped in a scrap of leather, sat the other remnant of his former life. A marshal's badge broken clean in half. He kept both pieces. He was not sure why. Silas passed the general store, the saloon, the modest church with its crooked steeple. A few townspeople glanced his way. A woman sweeping her porch. A man loading supplies onto a wagon. Their eyes held the particular suspicion reserved for strangers in small towns, but no recognition. Good. Recognition led to questions. He had been riding for 6 days straight, moving northwest from a forgettable settlement near the Yellowstone River. Before that, another town. Before that, another. Always moving, always searching for a name that seemed to exist only in whispers and shadows. William Kane. Every town, Silas asked. Every saloon, every trading post, every sheriff's office. The question was always the same, delivered in the same flat tone that discouraged follow-up. "I'm looking for a man named William Kane. You know him?" The answers varied. Some people shook their heads. Some looked confused. A few grew nervous, their eyes darting away too quickly. But none had given him what he needed. None had given him an answer he could use. The edge of town approached. Beyond it, the trail dissolved into wilderness, into the vast emptiness of the Montana plains, stretching toward mountains that seemed to touch the sky. Silas prepared to kick Ash into a trot to leave Blackwater Falls behind like all the others when he saw the river. It cut through the landscape maybe 200 yards to his left, a ribbon of dark water bordered by bare cottonwoods and stone. Something about it pulled at him, some instinct he could not name. He turned Ash toward the riverbank. The mare picked her way down the gentle slope, her hooves crunching through frost-stiffened grass. When they reached the water's edge, Silas dismounted. His boots struck the frozen ground with a sound like breaking glass. The river moved slowly here, thick with cold, its surface reflecting the darkening sky. He stood at the very edge where water met stone, and he looked down. His weathered reflection stared back, distorted by the moving current. A man hollowed out by grief. A lawman without a star. A husband without a wife. The water rippled. For a moment, just a heartbeat, the reflection changed. Instead of his weathered face, he saw another. A woman, blonde hair catching sunlight, green eyes full of laughter, a smile that had once been his entire world. Eleanor. Silas closed his eyes. When he opened them again, there was only his own face, only the present, only the cold. His hand moved automatically to his chest, to the place over his heart where he kept her wedding ring on a leather cord beneath his shirt. He did not pull it out. He had not looked at it in months. Looking at it made the wound fresh. Looking at it made him remember. 3 years. 3 years since someone had taken her from him. 3 years since he had failed to protect the only thing that mattered. 3 years since he had stopped being a marshal and become something less than human. The wind picked up, carrying with it the smell of coming snow. Silas opened his eyes fully and looked at the mountains in the distance. Somewhere out there, William Kane existed. Somewhere out there, the man who had destroyed his life was living, breathing, walking free. And Silas would find him. Not for justice. Justice was a word that belonged to the man he used to be. No, when he found William Kane, it would be for something simpler, something darker. It would be for the silence that came after. He turned from the river, moving back toward Ash with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had made and broken camp 1,000 times. The sun touched the mountains, now bleeding red and orange across the snow-capped peaks. In another hour, full darkness would fall. He should ride on, find a place to shelter before the temperature dropped further. But as he reached for Ash's reins, a sound stopped him. Footsteps, running, fast and uneven like someone limping. Silas's hand moved to his gun, though he did not draw. Old instincts never forgotten. He turned slowly, his body angled to present a smaller target, his eyes scanning the growing shadows. She emerged from behind a cluster of rocks near the road. A child, no more than 9 years old, small for her age, with tangled blonde hair that hung past her shoulders in matted knots. Her dress, once perhaps a pale blue, was torn in several places and stained with dirt and what might have been old blood. Her feet were bare despite the cold, covered in cuts and bruises that had scabbed over days ago, but it was her eyes that stopped Silas completely. They were too old, too knowing. The eyes of someone who had seen things no child should see. She ran toward him with desperate speed, her small chest heaving, her breath coming in ragged gasps that turned to white vapor in the cold air. When she was maybe 10 feet away, she stumbled, nearly falling. Silas moved without thinking, catching her before she hit the ground. Her skin was ice cold. She trembled violently, whether from cold or fear or both he could not tell. "Easy," he said quietly. His voice was rough from disuse. He could not remember the last time he had spoken more than a handful of words in a single day. "You're all right." She looked up at him, and for a moment her eyes widened with something that might have been recognition. Then her expression shifted to pure, desperate determination. "They're coming to kill him tonight." The words were a whisper, barely audible over the wind. Silas stared at her, his mind processing, analyzing. Kill who was coming? But before he could ask, she spoke again. "You're the only one who looks like you've already seen hell." The statement was so unexpected, so strangely perceptive, that Silas actually flinched. He studied her more closely. 9 years old, maybe. But the way she held herself, the way she looked at him without flinching, without the usual fear children showed around armed strangers, this was not a normal child. "Who's coming?" he asked. "Who are they going to kill? Please." Her small hand gripped his coat with surprising strength. "Please, you have to help. I tried everyone in town. They all said no. They said he deserves it. But he doesn't. He saved me." Silas felt the familiar weight settling onto his shoulders. The weight of someone else's problem, someone else's pain. He had spent 3 years learning to ignore that weight, to let it slide off him like water off stone. Caring meant staying. Staying meant failure. He gently pried her fingers from his coat. "I can't help you. I'm sorry." He turned toward Ash, reaching for the saddle horn. Behind him, the girl was silent. No crying, no pleading, just silence. And somehow the silence was worse than any amount of tears could have been. Silas mounted Ash, kicked her into motion, began to ride away. The girl's voice followed him, small but clear in the growing darkness. "Then I'll go back alone and watch him die, like I watched Mama." Silas pulled on the reins. Ash stopped. He sat very still, staring straight ahead at the darkening trail. "Like I watched Mama." He knew that tone, that empty, hollow acceptance. He had heard it in his own voice in the weeks after Eleanor died. The voice of someone who had already lost everything, who had nothing left to fear. Because fear required hope, and hope was a luxury reserved for people who still believed the world could be kind. Slowly, Silas turned Ash around. The girl stood where he had left her, small and alone against the vast backdrop of mountains and sky. She was not crying. She was not even looking at him anymore. She was looking north toward whatever fate awaited her in the darkness. How far? His voice was harder than he intended. She looked up, and for the first time, something like hope flickered in her expression. 8 miles, maybe more, through the forest. You walk that every day. She nodded. Alone. Another nod. Silas looked at the sky. Full dark in an hour. The temperature would drop below freezing. Wolves hunted in these woods. So did worse things, things that walked on 2 legs. He dismounted, walked to where she stood, knelt down so they were eye to eye. I'll take you there, he said quietly. But that's all. I take you there. I make sure you're safe, and then I leave. Understand? Yes. The word was barely a breath. What's your name? Ruth. Ruth what? She hesitated. Just Ruth. Fair enough. Silas stood. Can you walk 8 miles? Yes. Then let's move. We're losing light. He took Ash's reins and began walking north away from the road toward the tree line where the pines grew thick and dark. Ruth fell into step beside him, her bare feet making no sound on the frozen ground. She did not speak, did not ask questions, just walked, her gaze fixed forward with the grim determination of a soldier marching into battle. They entered the forest as the last light faded from the sky. The pines closed around them like walls, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out even the stars. Silas let his eyes adjust, trusting Ash to find the path. The mare had traveled worse terrain in darker conditions. Ruth moved ahead of him, now taking the lead with the confidence of someone who knew these woods intimately. She navigated around fallen logs, avoided patches of ice, chose paths that seemed random but always led forward. After what might have been an hour, Silas spoke. How long you been taking care of him alone? 4 days since the shooting, but I've been alone with him for 2 years. What about your mother? Ruth's pace did not change, but her shoulders stiffened. She's with the angels now. That's what the preacher said. I'm sorry. Don't be. You didn't kill her. The words hung in the cold air like an accusation. Silas said nothing more. They walked in silence for another mile. The trees grew denser, the path narrower. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called out, its voice echoing through the forest. Ruth did not react. Silas noticed she was limping more heavily now, favoring her left foot. Ruth, stop! She turned, confusion on her face. Silas moved closer, gesturing to her feet. Let me see. We don't have time. Let me see. Reluctantly, she lifted her left foot. Even in the dim moonlight filtering through the trees, Silas could see the damage. Deep cuts across the sole, some fresh, some infected. She had been walking on this for days, maybe weeks. He pulled a clean cloth from his saddlebag along with a small flask of whiskey. This is going to hurt. Everything hurts. Her voice was matter-of-fact. Just do it. Silas cleaned the wounds as gently as he could, but she was right. It had to hurt. Ruth did not make a sound, did not cry out. She just stared at the trees, her jaw clenched, her small hands balled into fists. When he finished, he tore strips from the cloth and wrapped her feet. Not perfect, but better. You should have told someone in town. I did. They said I deserved it. For being his daughter. Silas looked at her sharply. What did your father do? Ruth met his eyes. He saved my life, and they want to hang him for it. Before Silas could ask more, she turned and started walking again. He followed, questions multiplying in his mind. But he had learned long ago that some stories could not be rushed. They came out in their own time, or not at all. They walked for another hour. The forest began to thin, opening into a small clearing surrounded by rocky outcroppings. Ruth stopped suddenly, so abruptly that Silas nearly walked into her. She was staring at something ahead, a tree, a massive oak standing alone in the clearing like a sentinel. Its branches were bare, skeletal against the night sky. Ruth walked to the tree slowly as though approaching something sacred. She placed her small hand on the trunk, her lips moving in what might have been a prayer. Silas stayed back, giving her space, but he was close enough to see what had captured her attention. Words carved into the bark, deep and permanent, to Sarah, 1884, the year Eleanor had died. The year Silas's world had ended. He felt something cold settle in his chest. A coincidence, surely. Sarah was a common name. 1884 was just a year. It meant nothing. But Ruth's hand lingered on the carving, and when she finally turned away, there were tears on her cheeks. The first tears Silas had seen from her. "Who was Sarah?" he asked quietly. "My mama." Ruth wiped her face with her sleeve. "I come here sometimes, to talk to her, to tell her I'm sorry I couldn't save her." The weight in Silas's chest grew heavier. "You were a child. It wasn't your job to save her." "She was sick. They said it was in her head, that she went crazy. But she wasn't crazy." Ruth's voice was fierce now, defensive. "She saw something bad, and they killed her for it." "Who killed her?" Ruth looked at him for a long moment as though deciding whether to trust him with the truth. Finally she spoke. "The same people who are coming tonight. The same people who run this whole territory like it's their kingdom." She turned away from the tree and started walking again, faster now. "We're close, another mile." Silas followed, his mind racing. A conspiracy, murder, a child caught in the middle. Every instinct he had developed as a marshal was screaming at him to turn back to get away from whatever mess he was walking into. But his feet kept moving forward, because buried beneath the instinct for self-preservation was something else, something he had thought dead, the memory of a promise, the memory of Eleanor in their small home in Redemption Creek, asking him to always stand up for those who could not stand up for themselves. "I failed you once, Eleanor. Maybe this time I can fail a little less." The cabin appeared through the trees like something from a nightmare. It was small, maybe 20 feet square, built from rough-hewn moss that had weathered to a dark gray, but what made Silas's hand move automatically to his gun was the fortification. The windows were not just shuttered, but boarded over with narrow slits cut into the wood at eye level. Gun ports. The door was reinforced with iron bands, and the area around the cabin had been cleared of brush for at least 30 feet in every direction. This was not a home. This was a defensive position. Ruth stopped at the edge of the clearing, suddenly hesitant. For the first time since they had met, she looked like what she was, a frightened child. "He's inside," she whispered. "But he doesn't know I left. He'll be angry." "Does he hurt you?" "No." The answer was immediate and certain. "Never. He'd die before he'd hurt me. That's why they hate him." Before Silas could ask what she meant, the door to the cabin swung open. A man stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light of an oil lamp burning inside. He held a Winchester rifle, the barrel pointed directly at Silas's chest. His stance was that of someone who knew how to use it. The man was perhaps 38 years old, though hardship had aged him beyond his years. Tall, maybe 5'11", with a powerful build that spoke of hard, physical labor. His arms were thick with muscle, his hands scarred and calloused. A blacksmith, Silas guessed, or had been. "Ruth, get behind me." The man's voice was rough, strained with pain. "Now!" "Papa, no." Ruth ran forward, positioning herself between the rifle and Silas. "He followed me. He's not one of them." "Move, Ruth." "He helped me. He wrapped my feet. Please, Papa, you have to trust me." The man's eyes, barely visible in the shadows, moved from Ruth to Silas and back again. Silas could see him swaying slightly, fighting to stay upright. The rifle barrel wavered. Silas raised his hands, slowly, palms out. "I'm not here to hurt anyone. The girl asked for help. I brought her home. That's all. Nobody helps for free. What do you want?" "Nothing. I'll leave right now if that's what you want." The man studied him for a long moment. Then slowly the rifle lowered. "Ruth, come inside." Ruth hesitated, looking back at Silas. "Will you stay? Just until he's better." "Ruth, get inside." The man's voice was firmer now. She obeyed, slipping past him into the cabin. The man gestured with the rifle. "You too, but keep your hands where I can see them." Silas moved forward carefully, his hands still raised. As he approached, he got his first clear look at the man in the lamplight. But it was the wounds that drew Silas's attention. The man's shirt was soaked with blood, old and new. A bandage wrapped around his left shoulder was saturated red, seeping through the cloth. Another bandage covered his right side, just above his hip. Gunshot wounds, recent. The man saw Silas looking and gave a bitter smile. "Come to finish the job. If I came to kill you, you'd be dead already." "Then what do you want?" Silas looked at Ruth huddled in the corner, watching them both with quiet intensity. He looked at the man swaying on his feet minutes from collapse. He thought about Eleanor, about promises made and broken. "Let me help," he said quietly. "Then I'll go." The man laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. "Why, you don't know me. You don't know her. Why would you help?" "Because someone should." The words hung in the air between them. The man stared at him, searching for deception, for hidden motives. Finally his shoulders sagged. The rifle lowered completely. "Fine, but you try anything, and I'll put a bullet in you with my last breath." "Fair enough." The man turned and stumbled into the cabin. Silas followed, closing the door behind him. The interior was spare. A single room with a narrow bed against one wall, a small stove in the corner, a table, and 2 chairs. But like the exterior, everything showed signs of preparation for a siege. Ammunition boxes stacked near the windows, water barrels, enough canned food for weeks. The man made it to the bed before his legs gave out. He collapsed onto the thin mattress, his face pale, his breathing shallow. Ruth was already moving, gathering cloths and water, her movements practiced. How many times had she done this? How many times had she played nurse to a dying man? Silas moved to the bed, his hands already working to peel back the blood-soaked bandages. The shoulder wound was bad, the bullet still lodged deep in the muscle. The side wound was worse. A through and through, but infected. Without proper treatment, sepsis would kill him in days. "Ruth, I need clean water, hot if you can manage it, and any alcohol in the cabin." She moved to obey without question. Silas looked at the man. "This is going to hurt, a lot. Just do it." The man's eyes were already glazing with fever. "Save your bedside manner for someone who gives a damn." Silas worked through the night. He had treated enough gunshot wounds in his years as a marshal to know what needed doing. The shoulder bullet came out after 20 minutes of careful digging, the man biting down on a leather strap to keep from screaming. The side wound required cleaning with whiskey, a process that finally did make him scream, a raw sound of agony that echoed through the small cabin. Ruth never left. She held the man's hand, whispered to him, brought fresh water and clean cloths. She was 9 years old, and she moved like a battlefield surgeon's assistant. Dawn was breaking when Silas finally stepped back. The man was unconscious, but breathing steadier. The fever had not broken, but it had not worsened either. With rest and luck, he might live. Silas washed his hands in the basin, his arms aching, his back stiff. He had not slept, had not eaten. But the work had been good. It had given him something to focus on besides the emptiness in his head. Ruth appeared at his elbow holding a tin cup of water. "Thank you." He took the cup, drank. The water was cold and clean. "He'll need watching. The fever could still take him." "I know. I've done it before." Of course she had. Silas looked around the cabin, seeing it with fresh eyes in the pale morning light. The supplies, the fortifications, the weapons. "How long have you two been hiding here?" 2 years, since Mama died. And before that, we lived in town, Blackwater Falls. Papa had a forge. We were happy." Her voice was flat, reciting facts. "Then Mama died, and they said Papa killed her. They came to arrest him. We ran." Silas felt the pieces clicking together in his mind. A woman dead. A man accused. A child caught between. "Did he kill your mother?" Ruth looked at him, unflinching. "No, but he killed the man who did, and that's why they'll never stop hunting him." Before Silas could respond, Ruth moved to a loose floorboard near the bed. She pried it up with practiced ease, revealing a small space underneath. From it, she withdrew a wooden box worn smooth with age. She opened it carefully, reverently, and pulled out a sheaf of papers. Legal documents by the look of them. She handed them to Silas without a word. He unfolded them, squinting in the dim light. A death certificate. Sarah Whitmore. Deceased April 1884. Cause of death suicide by hanging. Signed by the county coroner and witnessed by Judge Aldous Kane. Suicide. Silas had seen enough death to know the word was often used to cover inconvenient murders. Ruth reached into the box again and pulled out a photograph. Old, faded, but clear enough. A man and a woman standing together, the woman holding an infant. The man was the wounded stranger on the bed, younger, happier. The woman was blonde, pretty, with a soft smile. The infant was presumably Ruth. "My parents," Ruth said, "when I was born." Silas studied the photograph. Sarah Whitmore, Something about her face nagged at him. A resemblance, perhaps. The blonde hair, the delicate features. But that was not uncommon. Many women in the territory had similar looks. Still, the feeling persisted, like seeing a ghost of someone familiar in a stranger's face. Ruth placed the first photograph back in the box and pulled out a second one. This photograph was different, older. The woman in it was the same Sarah Whitmore, but younger, maybe 19 or 20. She stood next to a different man, not the man on the bed. This man was taller, broader, with dark hair and a hard face. But it was what was written on the back that made Silas's blood run cold. Ruth and her father, 1882. He looked at the front of the photograph again, at the man who was supposedly Ruth's father, a man who was definitely not the wounded stranger lying unconscious on the bed. Ruth was watching him carefully. "That's not my real papa," she said quietly. "My real papa tried to kill me when I was 4. Thomas killed him to save me. Now the law wants to hang Thomas for murder." The cabin seemed to tilt around Silas. He looked at the photograph, at Ruth, at the man on the bed now with a name, Thomas. The pieces were falling into place, but they formed a picture he did not want to see. "Who was he?" Silas asked, his voice rough. "Your real father. His name was Jacob Hartley. He worked for the Canes. He was mean when he drank, which was always." "And Thomas?" "Thomas was Mama's friend. He had the forge next to our house. He heard me screaming one night when Jacob was—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "When Jacob was trying to teach Mama a lesson by hurting me, Thomas came. They fought. Jacob fell, hit his head on the anvil." Silas could see it. The accident, the panic, a good man standing over a bad man's body with a terrified child and her brutalized mother as witnesses. "The Canes called it murder," Ruth continued. "Said Thomas was jealous of Jacob, that he'd always wanted Mama for himself. They put out a warrant. So Thomas and Mama ran. They took me and we hid. For a while we were happy. Mama and Thomas got married in a little church up north. He became my real papa, the one who protected me, the one who loved me. And then your mother died." Ruth's hand tightened on the edge of the box. "Yes." "How?" "They said she hanged herself, that she went crazy from guilt and fear, but I know that's a lie." Ruth's voice shook with suppressed fury. "Mama wasn't crazy. She was strong, and the night before she died, she told me she'd found proof. Proof about who really killed someone important." Silas's pulse quickened. "Who?" Ruth shook her head. "She wouldn't tell me. Said it was safer if I didn't know, but the next day she was dead, and Thomas and I have been running ever since." Silas looked down at the photographs again, at Sarah Whitmore's face, that nagging sense of familiarity growing stronger. He pulled his own photograph from his coat pocket, the one he carried always, the one he could not bear to look at but could not bear to leave behind. Eleanor, his wife, taken from him 3 years ago. He looked at the photograph of Sarah Whitmore, then at Eleanor. Something about them. The blonde hair, the delicate bone structure, the shape of the eyes. A resemblance, certainly. But the light was poor and grief played tricks on the mind. He shook his head, pushing the thought away. Connections where none existed. "What was the teacher's name?" Silas asked suddenly. "The one your mother talked about." Ruth frowned, thinking. "I don't remember, but Mama said she was kind, that she cared about people nobody else cared about, like Mama did." Eleanor. It had to be. But how had Sarah known her Redemption Creek and Blackwater Falls were 40 miles apart? Not impossible to travel, but not common either, unless they had known each other before, unless there was a connection Silas did not yet understand. Ruth knelt beside his chair. "The people who killed Mama are the same people who are coming for Papa, and I think maybe they're the same people who took someone from you, too." Silas looked at her, at this child who had lost everything, who had carried burdens no 9-year-old should know existed, who had trusted a broken stranger to follow her home because she had no one else left to trust. Outside, the sun was fully risen now. A new day had begun. And Silas Mercer, the man who had spent 3 years running from his past, realized that fate had finally caught up with him. He looked at Thomas unconscious on the bed, at Ruth waiting for his answer, at the photographs in his hands that proved connections he did not yet fully understand. "I'll stay," he said quietly. "Not just until he's better. I'll stay until this is finished." Ruth's eyes widened. "Why, you don't owe us anything." Silas looked at the photograph of Sarah Whitmore, at the woman who somehow knew Eleanor, at the mystery that connected his dead wife to this hunted family. "Because," he said, his voice steady, "for the first time in 3 years, I owe it to someone who can't collect the debt anymore. And because running away once was enough, I won't fail again." Ruth threw her arms around him, her small body shaking with sobs she had held back for too long. Silas held her awkwardly, unpracticed at comfort, but he did not pull away. Through the window he could see the trail that led back to Blackwater Falls, back to the town where the Canes held power, back to the place where answers waited. And somewhere in that town, William Kane walked free. The man Silas had been hunting for 3 years, the man who had destroyed his life. Now he knew why he had been led here, why Ruth's desperate plea had stopped him when nothing else could. This was not coincidence. This was justice delayed, but not denied. A broken man and a desperate child bound together by loss and blood and a promise made to the dead. And somewhere in the cold Montana morning, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it the scent of snow and secrets and the reckoning to come. The fever broke on the 3rd day. Silas had stayed awake through most of it, monitoring Thomas's breathing, changing sweat-soaked bandages, forcing water between cracked lips when the man was conscious enough to swallow. Ruth helped when she could, but exhaustion finally claimed her on the 2nd night. She slept curled in the corner like a wounded animal, her small chest rising and falling with the deep rhythm of someone who had not truly rested in weeks. When Thomas's eyes finally opened clear and focused for the first time since Silas had arrived, the morning sun was streaming through the gun ports, painting thin lines of gold across the rough wooden floor. Thomas stared at the ceiling for a long moment, as though trying to remember where he was. Then his gaze shifted to Silas sitting in the chair beside the bed, and understanding flooded back. "You stayed." His voice was a rasp, barely above a whisper. "I said I would." Thomas tried to sit up, grimaced at the pain, and settled back against the thin pillow. "Why, you don't know us. This isn't your fight." Silas did not answer immediately. He stood moved to the stove and poured coffee from the pot that had been sitting there since dawn. He brought a cup to Thomas, helped him drink. The coffee was bitter and lukewarm, but Thomas swallowed it gratefully. 3 years ago," Silas said quietly, returning to his chair, "I was a United States Marshal in a town called Redemption Creek. You know it." Thomas's eyes widened slightly. "I lived there, before we ran. I had a forge near the church. Then you might remember my wife, Eleanor Mercer. She taught at the schoolhouse." Recognition flickered across Thomas's face, followed quickly by something darker, sorrow, and beneath it, guilt. "I remember her. Kind woman. Always brought food to the poor families. She was—" He stopped, his jaw tightening. "She was Sarah's best friend." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Silas felt the old wound tearing open the one he had spent 3 years trying to cauterize with distance and silence. "Sarah told you what happened. She saw it." Thomas's voice broke. "God help her. She saw the whole thing." And so it began. The story Silas had waited 3 years to hear. Thomas spoke slowly, fighting through pain and memory. The words came out fractured, non-linear pieces of a terrible puzzle that Silas had to assemble in his mind as they emerged. "It was April," Thomas said, staring at the ceiling as though he could see the past written there. 1883. Sarah came to the forge late one evening. She was crying, shaking. I'd never seen her so scared. Silas leaned forward, every muscle tense. What did she see? Everything. The word was a stone dropping into dark water. Thomas closed his eyes, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped to barely more than a whisper. Eleanor had discovered something, some kind of smuggling operation running through Redemption Creek. Guns, morphine, other things. She'd found records, receipts, enough to prove the whole thing was being run by the town's leadership. Silas's hands clenched into fists. He had suspected as much. Eleanor had mentioned concerns about irregularities. She had noticed strange shipments arriving at odd hours, money moving through channels that made no sense. But she had promised to be careful, promised to wait for him to investigate properly. She told Sarah first, Thomas continued, wanted advice on what to do. Sarah convinced her to go to you, to tell her husband the marshal and let him handle it. She never got the chance. No. Thomas opened his eyes, and they were wet. Sarah was with her that night. They were walking back from the schoolhouse together. It was late, maybe 9 o'clock, dark. Sarah had told Eleanor she'd walk her home, make sure she was safe. The scene unfolded in Silas's mind with terrible clarity. Two women walking through the dark streets of a frontier town. Friends, confidants, one of them carrying a secret that would get her killed. They were 2 blocks from your house when it happened. Sarah heard footsteps behind them, fast, heavy. She turned to look, but Eleanor told her to keep walking, said it was probably just someone heading to the saloon. Thomas's voice cracked. He swallowed hard before continuing. The man caught up to them, called out Eleanor's name. She stopped, turned around. Sarah recognized him. Everyone in town did. It was Sheriff Garrett. William Kane, second in command. William Kane. The name sent ice through Silas's veins. Eleanor asked what he wanted. He said he needed to talk to her. About some trouble at the school, Eleanor told him it could wait until morning. She was tired, wanted to go home to her husband. Silas could hear Eleanor's voice in his mind, firm but polite. She had never been afraid to stand up to authority when she thought she was in the right. The sheriff insisted, said it was urgent. But Sarah said there was something wrong about the way he was standing, the way his hand kept moving to his gun. She grabbed Eleanor's arm, told her they should go, now. Thomas paused, struggling for breath. The telling was taking its toll, reopening wounds that had never properly healed. That's when he drew. No warning, no threat. He just pulled his gun and fired. The words hit Silas like physical blows. He had known Eleanor was shot. The coroner's report had been clear about that. But hearing how it happened, the casual brutality of it made the old rage flare white-hot in his chest. Eleanor fell. Sarah screamed. The sheriff turned the gun on her, but she ran, cut through an alley, hid behind some crates, watched as the sheriff staged the scene, tore Eleanor's dress, scattered her belongings, made it look like a robbery gone wrong. Silas's vision blurred. He blinked hard, forcing himself to focus, to listen, to finally know the truth. Sarah stayed hidden until he left. Then she went to Eleanor. But it was too late. She was already gone. Gone. Such a small word for such an enormous loss. Why didn't Sarah come forward? Silas's voice was rough. Why didn't she tell someone? She tried. Thomas's eyes met his. She went to the marshal's office the next morning, but you were gone. Silas remembered. He had left town that morning, writing to Helena to report Eleanor's murder to the territorial authorities. He had been desperate for help, for justice, for someone to listen. By the time he returned 3 days later, the case had been closed. Robbery, random violence, no suspects. The sheriff himself had signed the report. Sarah waited for you to come back, Thomas said. But when you did, you weren't the same man. She could see it. The whole town could. You were broken. And the Kanes were watching everything, watching who you talked to, where you went. Sarah was terrified. If she came forward, they'd kill her too. So she ran. We ran, together, with Ruth. Thomas's jaw tightened. I'd been in love with Sarah for years, since before Jacob, but she was married and I respected that, even though Jacob was a monster who beat her when he drank, which was almost every night. When Eleanor died, Sarah came to me, told me everything, begged me to help her get away. And you did. I would have done anything for her. Thomas's voice was fierce despite its weakness. Anything. We took Ruth and left in the middle of the night. Headed north, found this place. For a while we were happy. Sarah and I got married in a little church near the Canadian border. Ruth started calling me Papa. We thought we'd escaped. But escape was an illusion. Silas knew that better than anyone. The past always found you eventually. What happened to Jacob? Thomas's expression darkened. That's the part they want to hang me for. Before he could continue, a small sound came from the corner. Ruth, awake now, watching them both with quiet intensity. How much had she heard? All of it, Silas guessed. This child had no illusions left to lose. Tell him, Ruth said quietly. Tell him what Jacob did. Thomas looked at her, his face a mixture of love and sorrow. Ruth, he needs to know. If he's going to help us, he needs to know everything. Thomas nodded slowly. Jacob found us. About 6 months after we'd settled here. I don't know how. Maybe the Canes told him where to look. Maybe he just got lucky. But he showed up one night drunk and mean, pounding on the door, shouting that Sarah was his wife and Ruth was his property. You fought him. I tried to reason with him first, told him to go sleep it off, come back in the morning when he was sober, but he wouldn't leave, kept getting more agitated, more violent. Then he saw Ruth watching from the window. Ruth's small voice cut in. He said he was going to teach Mama a lesson, show her what happened to women who ran away from their husbands. Thomas's hands clenched into fists despite the pain. He grabbed Ruth, dragged her toward the old well behind the cabin. It was dry, had been for years, deep, dark. He held her over the edge, dangling her by one arm. She was screaming. Sarah was screaming. And Jacob just laughed. Silas could see it, the drunken rage, the casual cruelty, the kind of evil that wore a human face. I hit him, hard as I could. He dropped Ruth. She fell but away from the well, safe. And then Jacob came at me. We fought, rolled in the dirt. He was bigger than me, stronger, but I was sober and desperate. We ended up near the forge. My tools were scattered around, and Jacob's head came down on the anvil. The sound must have been terrible. The wet crack of bone meeting iron. I didn't mean to kill him. I swear to God, I just wanted him to stop, to leave us alone, but he was dead, and we both knew what that meant. The Canes would call it murder. Worse. They said it was premeditated, that I'd been having an affair with Sarah for years, that I'd killed Jacob to steal his wife and child. They put out a warrant. Murder in the first degree. Hanging offense. And so the trap had closed. A good man trying to protect a woman and child turned into a wanted criminal by the very system meant to deliver justice. Silas stood paced to the window, looked out at the forest beyond. His mind was racing, connecting threads, seeing patterns. The Canes wanted Sarah dead because she witnessed Eleanor's murder, but they couldn't just kill her outright. Too suspicious. So they used Jacob, sent him after her, knowing there'd be a confrontation, knowing you'd protect her. And when I did, I became the criminal. They got 2 birds with 1 stone, discredited the witness and eliminated the man who loved her. But Sarah was still alive, still a threat. Thomas's voice dropped to barely a whisper. For 2 more years. We were careful, moved around, stayed hidden. But she was gathering evidence, writing everything down, names, dates, places. She said if something happened to her, the truth would come out. And then something did happen. They found us. I don't know how. But one morning I went to town for supplies, and when I came back, Thomas stopped, unable to continue. Ruth spoke instead, her voice flat and emotionless. Mama was hanging from the barn rafter. There was a note. It said she was sorry, that she couldn't live with the guilt anymore. But she didn't write it. No. Ruth's small hands clenched. Mama's handwriting slanted to the right. The note slanted to the left. And she always signed her name with a little heart over the I in Sarah. The note didn't have that. Details a child would notice. Details that would be dismissed by adults as grief-stricken imagination. The coroner ruled it suicide, Thomas said. Case closed. I tried to fight it, but we were already wanted fugitives. Nobody would listen. So Ruth and I ran again, deeper into the wilderness, and we've been running ever since. Silas turned from the window. Until 4 days ago. Until they found us again. Sent men in the night. I heard them coming, grabbed my rifle. Got 2 of them before they got me. The rest ran when I holed up in here, but they'll be back. With more men. More guns. How many? I recognized one of them. Deputy from Blackwater Falls. Which means the Canes know exactly where we are. Silas felt the familiar weight settling onto his shoulders. The weight of impossible choices and dangerous odds. He had run from this feeling for 3 years, but Ruth's eyes were on him, trusting, hoping. And somewhere in the ground, back in Redemption Creek, Eleanor's bones waited for justice. I need to go into town, he said quietly. See what we're dealing with. Thomas struggled to sit up. You'll be walking into the lion's den. I've been in worse places. They'll know you, recognize you. Former marshal asking questions about the Canes. I've changed a lot in 3 years. Silas touched the scar on his face. And I know how to be invisible when I need to be. He spent the rest of the morning preparing, cleaned his gun, checked his ammunition, changed into clothes that were worn and anonymous. In the small mirror above the wash basin, he barely recognized himself. The man staring back looked 10 years older than the marshal who had left Redemption Creek. Harder, colder, good. That man was dead. This one might actually be useful. Ruth approached as he was saddling Ash. "You're coming back, right? I promised, didn't I? People break promises all the time." Silas knelt so they were eye level. "I don't. Not anymore. I'll be back before dark. Stay inside. Keep the door barred. If anyone comes who isn't me, you know what to do." She nodded, her small face grave. "Shoot first, ask questions later. Good girl." He mounted Ash and rode toward Blackwater Falls, leaving the cabin and its secrets behind. The town looked different in full daylight. Less ominous, more ordinary. Just another frontier settlement clinging to existence in the harsh Montana territory. But Silas knew better than to trust appearances. Monsters often wore pleasant faces. He tied Ash outside the saloon and went inside. It was early afternoon and the place was mostly empty. A bartender wiping glasses. 2 old men playing cards in the corner. A woman in a faded dress sweeping the floor. Silas ordered whiskey, paid with coins that had been in his pocket so long they were warm. The bartender poured without comment, his face showing the studied neutrality of someone who had learned not to ask questions. "Passing through." The bartender's tone was casual, but his eyes were assessing. "Maybe. Depends on work." "Not much work around here this time of year. Winter's coming. Most folks are hunkering down." "I'm not picky. Ranch hand guard duty, whatever pays." The bartender shrugged. "Might try the sheriff's office. They're always looking for deputies." "Sheriff, any good?" "Depends what you mean by good." The bartender's voice was carefully neutral. "He keeps the peace. That's all most folks care about." Silas nursed his drink, listening. The old men in the corner were arguing about cattle prices. The woman finished sweeping and disappeared into a back room. Nothing useful. He was about to leave when the door opened and a man walked in. Young, maybe 28, wearing a deputy's badge and carrying himself with the careful posture of someone who spent a lot of time trying to look more confident than he felt. He had dark hair, a clean-shaven face, and eyes that moved constantly, taking in every detail of the room. The bartender straightened. "Deputy Flynn, usual." "Yeah, thanks, Pete." Flynn took a seat at the bar, 2 stools away from Silas. Close enough to be friendly, far enough to maintain distance. Silas recognized the positioning. This was a man who had been trained to observe, to assess threats. For a few minutes they drank in silence. Then Flynn spoke, his voice quiet enough that the old men in the corner couldn't hear. "You're the one who brought the girl back." It was not a question. Silas kept his expression neutral. "Don't know what you're talking about." "Ruth Whitmore, 9 years old, lives with a wanted killer in a cabin 8 miles north of here. She was in town 3 days ago begging for help. You followed her home." Silas's hand moved imperceptibly closer to his gun. "You keeping tabs on children now? I keep tabs on everything in this town. It's my job." Flynn took a sip of his whiskey. "The question is, who are you, and why would a stranger help a fugitive's kid? Maybe I'm just a good Samaritan. Or maybe you're something else. Someone with a history, someone the Canes would be very interested in meeting." The name hung in the air between them. Silas turned his head slightly, studying Flynn's profile. "You work for them." "Everyone in this territory works for them, one way or another. Question is, are you smart enough to do the same, or are you going to be another fool who thinks he can fight them?" Silas considered his options. This could be a trap, or it could be an opportunity. Either way, staying silent would get him nowhere. "What if I told you I think the girl and her father are innocent?" Flynn's laugh was bitter. "Innocent? That's a funny word. Doesn't mean much around here." "It should." "Should and does are 2 different things, friend." Flynn finished his drink, signaled for another. "Thomas Whitmore killed a man, that's a fact. Whether the man deserved it or not doesn't change the law. The law is supposed to be about justice." "Justice!" Flynn spat the word like a curse. "You want to know about justice, I'll tell you about justice. 3 years ago, a woman was murdered in Redemption Creek, shot in the back by Sheriff Garrett on orders from William Kane. You know why? Because she found out about the smuggling operation they were running. Guns to the Indians. morphine to the Chinese workers on the railroad. Enough illegal activity to get them all hanged twice over. Silas's pulse quickened. How do you know this? Because I was there. I was Garrett's deputy. I saw the whole thing. Flynn's voice was flat emotionless. And I kept my mouth shut because I was young and scared, and I wanted to live. That's my justice. That's what justice looks like in Kane territory. The confession hung in the air like gunpowder smoke. Silas tried to process what he was hearing. This man, this deputy, had witnessed Eleanor's murder, had known the truth for 3 years, and had done nothing. You're telling me this, why? Because I'm tired. Flynn stared into his glass. Tired of being part of it, tired of watching good people get destroyed while monsters walk free. And because maybe, just maybe, you're the one who can actually do something about it. What makes you think I'm anyone special? Flynn turned to look at him directly for the first time. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, haunted. Because I know who you are, Marshal Mercer. Or should I say, former Marshal, the man who lost his wife and then lost himself. The man who's been searching for William Kane for 3 years, but never could find him. Silas's hand was on his gun now, thumb on the hammer. Careful. Relax. If I wanted you dead, you'd already be dead. The sheriff has men all over this town. One word from me, and they'd bury you in an unmarked grave next to your wife. Then why don't you? Because William Kane is my cousin, and I'm done protecting him. The words hit Silas like a physical blow. He stared at Flynn, searching for deception, for trap, but all he saw was exhaustion and self-loathing. Your cousin. My mother's sister's boy. We grew up together. I worshipped him when I was young, thought he was everything a man should be. Strong, confident, powerful. Flynn's voice dripped with disgust. Took me years to see what he really was, a monster wearing a badge. If you hate him so much, why not arrest him yourself? With what evidence? With whose authority his brother is the territorial judge? Every lawman in 100 miles is either on their payroll or too scared to act. I'm one deputy with a conscience. That doesn't make me a hero. It just makes me a dead man walking. Silas released his gun but kept his hand close. What do you want from me? Help me take them down. Both of them, William and Aldous Kane. End this. Flynn leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. I've been gathering evidence for 2 years. Documents, testimonies from people too terrified to speak publicly. Records of every crime, every murder, every act of corruption. I've got enough to hang them 10 times over. Then why haven't you used it? Because I need someone they don't control to present it. Someone with authority, a marshal. Flynn's eyes bored into his. You might be broken, Mercer. You might be half dead inside, but you're still a lawman. You still believe in justice, even if you've forgotten how. Silas thought about what he used to be. A marshal. A man who believed the law could protect people. I'm not a marshal anymore. Then what are you? The question echoed in Silas's mind. What was he, a man running from his own shadow? Or maybe, just maybe, he was something else, something that Ruth's desperate plea and Thomas's story and Sarah's murder had awakened. Something he thought had died with Eleanor, but had only been sleeping. A man who still believed in justice even when justice was impossible. I'm someone who owes a debt, Silas said quietly, to a woman who can't collect, to a girl who deserves better, to a man who protected them both. Flynn nodded slowly. Then we might actually have a chance. They talked for another hour, keeping their voices low, their bodies angled to discourage eavesdropping. Flynn laid out the evidence he had collected. The shipping manifests showing illegal weapons. The testimony of a Chinese worker who had survived an overdose of tainted morphine. The records proving Judge Aldous Kane had falsified court documents to cover his brother's crimes. But there's more, Flynn said, his voice dropping even lower. Something I only found out about recently. Something that connects everything. What? Ruth Whitmore. Silas went very still. What about her? She's not Jacob Hartley's daughter. I know. Thomas told me Jacob tried to kill her. That's why Thomas killed him. No, Flynn shook his head. You don't understand. Jacob didn't try to kill her out of drunken meanness. He tried to kill her because he finally figured out the truth. What truth? Flynn looked around, making sure no one was close enough to hear. Jacob Hartley was sterile. Childhood illness. He couldn't have children. Everyone knew it. But when Sarah got pregnant, she convinced him it was a miracle. Divine intervention. Jacob believed it because he wanted to, because having a child meant he was a real man. Silas's stomach turned cold, but it wasn't a miracle. No, it was rape. Flynn's voice was hard. 5 years ago, Sarah was working as a seamstress in Blackwater Falls. Jacob was in jail for a month after a bar fight. She was alone, vulnerable. William Kane saw his opportunity. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. He forced himself on her. And when she got pregnant, she was too terrified to tell the truth. Told Jacob it was his. Raised Ruth as Hartley's daughter. It worked for years, until Jacob started to suspect. Started asking questions, counting months, noticing that Ruth looked nothing like him. That's why he tried to kill her. She was evidence. Evidence that William Kane had committed a crime. Evidence that could destroy him if it ever came to light. When Thomas killed Jacob, Kane saw his chance. Get rid of the witness, get rid of Sarah, get rid of anyone who knew the truth. Except Ruth. Except Ruth? The living proof. The one person who could bring down the entire Kane empire just by existing. Silas felt rage building in his chest, white hot, barely controlled. This child, this innocent, terrified child, was hunted not because of anything she had done, but because of what had been done to her mother. Does Ruth know? I don't think so. Sarah probably never told her. How do you explain something like that to a child? And Thomas? He knows. Has to. He married Sarah knowing the truth. Raised Ruth as his own anyway. That's the kind of man he is. Silas stood abruptly. He needed air, needed space to think, to process. This was bigger than he had imagined. Darker. More tangled. Flynn stood as well. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. We'll figure it out fast. William is planning something. I heard him talking to Judge Aldous yesterday. They're sending a full squad to that cabin, 20 men, maybe more. They're done playing careful. They want Thomas dead, and Ruth disappeared. When 3 days, maybe 4, soon as the weather clears. 3 days, not enough time to run. Not enough time to hide. Barely enough time to think. Silas headed for the door. Flynn called after him. Mercer, if you're going to do something stupid, at least let me help. I work alone. Yeah, and look where that's gotten you. 3 years chasing shadows and coming up empty. Maybe it's time to try something different. Silas paused at the door, looked back. Why should I trust you? Because I'm William Kane's cousin, and I hate him more than you ever could. Because I watched him destroy good people my entire life, and I'm done being part of it. Because maybe helping you is the only way I can live with myself. It was not a good reason, but it was an honest one. I'll think about it, Silas said, and walked out into the cold afternoon air. He rode back to the cabin as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. His mind was churning, trying to find a path through the impossible situation. 20 men, armed and determined. Against one wounded blacksmith, one man who had spent 3 years running, and one 9-year-old girl. The odds were laughable. Suicidal, and yet walking away was not an option anymore. When he reached the cabin, Ruth was waiting on the porch. She ran to him as soon as she saw Ash, her face tight with worry. You came back. I said I would. What did you find out? Silas dismounted, tied Ash to the post. We need to talk, all of us. Inside, Thomas was sitting up, looking stronger than he had that morning. Color had returned to his face. His eyes were clear. He looked at Silas and knew immediately that the news was not good. Tell me. So Silas told them everything. About Flynn, about the evidence, about the squad coming in 3 days. He watched their faces as he spoke, saw Ruth's fear, saw Thomas's grim acceptance. When he finished, Thomas spoke first. Then we're out of time. We can run. Get you both to Canada before they arrive. We've been running for 2 years. It doesn't work. They always find us. Then we fight. Against 20 men, we'd be slaughtered. Maybe, but at least we'd go down on our feet. Thomas shook his head. No, there's another way. Ruth looked at him sharply. Papa, no. Ruth, listen to me. Thomas's voice was gentle but firm. This has to end. And there's only one way to end it that gives you a future. What are you talking about? Thomas looked at Silas. Take Ruth north, across the border. Get her somewhere safe, somewhere the Kanes can't reach, and I'll turn myself in. No! Ruth's voice was a scream. No, Papa, you can't. I can and I will. It's the only way to protect you. They'll hang you, probably, but you'll be alive. You'll be free. Ruth was crying now, great racking sobs that shook her small frame. I already lost Mama. I can't lose you too. Thomas pulled her into his arms, held her as she wept. Over her head his eyes met Silas's. They were filled with sorrow but also with determination. This was a man who had made his choice and would not be swayed. I've already taken one father from you, Thomas whispered into Ruth's hair. I won't let you watch me hang. I won't let you carry that memory. Silas turned away, giving them privacy. He walked to the window, looked out at the forest growing dark as night approached. His mind was racing through options, through possibilities. There had to be another way, some path he was not seeing. Ruth's sobs eventually quieted. When Silas turned back, she was sitting beside Thomas on the bed, her small hand gripping his. Her eyes were red but dry. She looked at Silas with an expression far too old for her face. You think he's right, don't you? You think he should turn himself in? I think, Silas said carefully, that we all need to survive this. How we do that, I'm not sure yet. Well, I'm not leaving him. If he stays, I stay. Ruth, Thomas's voice was pained. No, you don't get to sacrifice yourself for me. That's not how families work. Sometimes it is. Then I guess we're not a family anymore. The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were wet. Ruth, please. Promise me you won't turn yourself in. Promise me you'll fight. I can't make that promise. Then I can't promise to leave. They stared at each other, locked in a battle of wills. Neither wanted to fight. Silas felt like an intruder, witnessing something too private for outside eyes. But he could not leave, could not walk away from this moment, because in their argument, in their desperate love for each other, he saw Eleanor, saw the wife he had failed to protect, the family he had lost, and he understood that this was his chance, not to save Eleanor, that was impossible, but to save what Eleanor would have wanted him to save, the innocent, the helpless, the ones caught in a system that ground them to dust and called it justice. There might be another way, he heard himself saying. They both looked at him, waiting, hoping. It's dangerous, maybe more dangerous than running or surrendering, but it's a chance. What is it? Ruth's voice was small. Silas thought of Flynn, of the evidence, of what he used to be, of 3 years spent running from his own shadow. We expose them, all of them, William and Aldous Kane. We bring the truth to light and let it burn their empire to the ground. Thomas shook his head. You said it yourself. The judge is Aldous Kane. The law is theirs. Who would listen? The territorial governor, the federal marshals. There are still people in Helena who believe in justice. If we can get the evidence to them, if we can prove what the Kanes have done, they'll have to act. And if they don't, then we tried. And we go down fighting instead of running. It was Ruth who spoke next, her voice quiet but steady. What would we have to do? Silas looked at this child, this small, fierce soul who had already lost so much. What he was about to ask would put her in even more danger, might get her killed. But keeping her ignorant would not protect her. The Kanes were coming either way. I need you to tell me everything your mother wrote, everything she knew, every detail, no matter how small. Ruth's eyes widened. Mama's diary. She kept it hidden, made me memorize parts of it, in case something happened to her. Where is it now? Buried, near Mama's tree. The oak. The memorial Ruth visited on their journey to the cabin. Of course, Sarah would have hidden evidence there, a place her daughter would remember, a place the Kanes would never think to look. Can you find it in the dark? Ruth nodded. I could find it blind. Silas looked at Thomas. Can you ride, if I have to? You'll have to. We leave at midnight. Get the diary. Get to Helena before the Kanes realize what we're doing. It's 3 days' hard ride. Can you make it? Thomas touched his wounded shoulder, winced. I'll make it or die trying. That's the spirit. They spent the remaining hours preparing. Silas checked their weapons, counted ammunition. Ruth packed food and supplies. Thomas rested, gathering his strength for the journey ahead. As the moon rose, Silas found himself sitting outside the cabin looking at the stars. The same stars Eleanor had loved. The same sky they had watched together on quiet nights when the world seemed full of possibility. Footsteps behind him, small, careful." Ruth sat down beside him, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the cold. For a long time they did not speak, just sat in comfortable silence, breathing frost into the night air. Finally, Ruth spoke. "Do you think God forgives people who kill bad men?" The question caught Silas off guard. He looked at her, this child who had seen too much, known too much, carried burdens that would break most adults. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I used to think I knew. When I wore a badge, everything seemed clear. Good and evil. Right and wrong. But now what?" He thought about Eleanor, about Sarah, about Thomas killing a man to save a child, about himself hunting William Kane with murder in his heart. "My wife used to say something. She said sometimes the world is so broken that fixing it means breaking yourself too. That real justice isn't about following rules. It's about doing what's right, even when the cost is everything." "Is that why you left after she died?" The question cut deep. Silas had asked himself the same thing 1,000 times. "I didn't leave. I ran away." What's the difference? Leaving is a choice. Running is what you do when you're too scared to choose. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I don't think you're scared anymore." "What makes you say that?" "Because scared people don't come back. They don't help strangers. They don't fight 20 men to protect a girl they just met." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting starlight. "You're not running anymore. You're walking toward something." The wisdom in her words shook him. This child saw him more clearly than he saw himself. "Maybe," he said quietly. "Or maybe I'm just tired of being what I've become." "What were you before?" "A husband, a marshal, a man who believed the law could protect people." And now Silas thought about the broken badge, about 3 years of hunting shadows, about Ruth's desperate plea and Thomas's sacrifice and Eleanor's memory. "Now I'm just a man trying to keep a promise." Ruth leaned against him, her small weight warm in the cold night. "Good, because I think that's exactly what we need." They sat together under the stars, preparing for a battle neither could win, but both refused to run from. And somewhere in the darkness, the future waited with teeth bared and guns loaded, ready to test just how much a promise was worth. Midnight came and went. They did not ride north to retrieve Sarah's diary. They did not flee toward Canada. They did not turn themselves in. Instead, they waited. Because sometimes the only way forward is to stand still and let the storm come to you. Silas had made the decision as the moon climbed higher, as Ruth dozed against his shoulder and Thomas slept fitfully inside. 3 days' hard ride to Helena meant 3 days exposed on the open trail. 3 days where the Kanes could intercept them, hunt them down like animals, kill them in some lonely canyon where their bodies would never be found. No, if this was going to end, it would end here, on ground they knew, in a cabin built for defense, with the truth as their weapon and desperation as their shield. He woke Ruth gently, carried her inside, laid her on the bed beside Thomas. Then he began to prepare. The cabin was small but well positioned. Thomas had chosen the location carefully 2 years ago. The clearing around it gave clear sightlines in every direction. The forest behind provided escape routes if needed. The well was close enough to reach under cover, and the cabin itself, despite its rough appearance, was solid. Thick logs, reinforced door, gun ports at strategic angles, a fortress in miniature. Silas spent the hours before dawn checking every weakness, strengthening every defense. He moved Thomas's ammunition closer to the windows, filled buckets with water in case of fire, cleared debris from around the cabin that could provide cover for attackers. When the sun rose pale and cold, he was ready, or as ready as any man could be for certain death. Thomas woke at first light, his face drawn with pain, but his eyes alert. He took in the preparations without comment, just nodded once, understanding without words what Silas had decided. "You think they'll come today?" His voice was rough from sleep. Maybe tomorrow. Flynn said 3 or 4 days, but men like the Kanes don't stick to schedules when they smell blood." "How many do you think?" Flynn said 20, I'm guessing more. "The Kanes don't take chances." Thomas moved to the window, looked out at the forest. "We can't win this." "No, but we can make it cost them." "And then what?" Silas checked his Colt, spun the cylinder. 6 rounds. He had maybe 40 more in his belt. Not enough. Never enough. Then we hope Flynn comes through. Hope the evidence is enough. Hope someone in Helena gives a damn about justice. That's a lot of hoping. It's all we've got. Ruth stirred on the bed, her eyes opening slowly. For a moment, just a heartbeat, she looked like any normal child waking from sleep. Innocent, unburdened. Then reality crashed back, and awareness returned to her expression. They're coming today, aren't they? She did not phrase it as a question. We don't know that. Yes, we do. I can feel it. And she was right. Silas could feel it too. A pressure in the air, a weight, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. Something gathering, something building, something inevitable. They ate breakfast in silence, dried meat and hard bread, water from the well. Ruth barely touched her food. Thomas forced himself to eat, knowing he would need strength. Silas ate mechanically, fuel for a body that would soon be pushed beyond its limits. The morning stretched, hours passing like years. Silas rotated between the gun ports, watching the forest, watching the trail. Nothing moved except wind through the pines. Nothing stirred except his own racing thoughts. He thought about Eleanor, about the night she died, about coming home to an empty house and a body at the undertaker's, about the way grief had hollowed him out, turned him into something less than human. More like a walking wound. He thought about Sarah, a woman he had never met, but felt like he should have known. Eleanor's friend, her confidant. How different would things have been if he had listened when Eleanor mentioned concerns, if he had acted faster, if he had been the marshal he was supposed to be. He thought about Ruth, this child who should have had a chance at a normal life, instead of this nightmare of running and hiding and watching the people she loved die. And he thought about himself, about the man he had been and what he had become, about running and hiding and 3 years of emptiness. Not this time. This time, even if it kills me, I fight. Noon came. The sun hung directly overhead, pale and distant. Still nothing. Thomas was growing restless. His wounds ached. He could not stay still. Kept moving from window to window, checking angles, counting ammunition. Ruth sat in the corner, her mother's shawl wrapped around her shoulders. She was humming something under her breath, a song Sarah must have taught her, sad and sweet and haunting. 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3. The waiting was worse than fighting. At least in a fight you knew what to do. Point, shoot, survive. But waiting gave your mind time to work, time to imagine all the ways you could fail, all the people you could lose. 4 o'clock. That's when Silas saw them. Movement at the tree line, just a flicker, a shadow that should not be there. He raised his hand, signaling silence. Thomas and Ruth froze. Silas moved to the eastern gun port, looked out, saw nothing, but the feeling remained. The pressure, the certainty. They're here. Thomas, Ruth, positions. They moved without hesitation. Thomas to the western window rifle, ready despite the pain it cost him to lift it. Ruth to the northern gun port, too small to shoot but perfect for watching, calling out what she saw. Silas took the south, the main approach, where they would come if they came. Minutes passed. The shadows lengthened as the sun dropped toward the mountains. Still nothing visible. But Silas could feel them out there, circling, positioning, getting ready. Then Ruth's voice, small but clear. North, 3 men, maybe more behind. Thomas. West, I count 5, spreading out. Silas scanned south, saw them now, 6 men emerging from the trees, walking slowly, deliberately. No attempt to hide. They wanted to be seen. And in the center, tall and confident, walked a man Silas recognized even after 3 years of hunting his shadow. William Kane. He was younger than Silas expected, maybe 45. Handsome in a cold, cruel way. Dark hair going silver at the temples, sharp features, eyes like chips of ice. He wore a sheriff's badge on his chest and a gun at his hip, and he moved with the easy confidence of a man who had never lost anything that mattered. Behind him, spread out in a loose formation, were at least 20 men, maybe more, all armed, all watching the cabin with the patient hunger of wolves surrounding wounded prey. William stopped maybe 50 yards from the cabin, close enough to be heard, far enough to be safe from a desperate shot. He cupped his hands around his mouth and called out, "Thomas Whitmore, I know you're in there, and I know you're not alone. His voice carried across the clearing, smooth, educated. The voice of a man used to being obeyed. Thomas looked at Silas. Silas shook his head. "Don't answer. Don't give him anything." William waited. When no response came, he smiled. "All right, we'll do it the hard way. I've got 30 men surrounding this cabin. You've got maybe 3 guns and limited ammunition. This only ends one way. But I'm a reasonable man. I'm willing to offer terms." Still silence from the cabin. William's smile widened. "Send out the girl. Ruth. Just her. Nobody else gets hurt. You and whoever's helping you can ride away. I'll even give you a head start. All I want is the child." Ruth's sharp intake of breath was audible even across the room. Silas saw her small hands clench into fists. "She's my daughter," William continued, his voice carrying false warmth. "My blood. I have a right to raise her, give her a proper life, education, wealth, everything a child deserves. What can you give her, Thomas? A life running, hiding, watching you die slow from those wounds." It was a good speech, persuasive if you did not know the truth. If you did not know what William Kane really was. Thomas's jaw clenched. His finger moved to the trigger. Silas could see him wanting to shoot, to end this with one bullet through that smiling face. But 50 yards was a long shot with a rifle, even for a good marksman, and Thomas was wounded feverish, far from his best. "I'll give you 5 minutes to think about it," William called. "Then I'm coming in, and I promise you it won't be gentle." He turned and walked back toward the tree line. His men held their positions, waiting, patient. Inside the cabin, silence stretched like a wire pulled too tight. Ruth spoke first. Her voice was small but steady. "Maybe I should go." "No." Thomas's response was immediate, absolute. "But he said you could leave, you could get away, get better. If I go with him, you live." "Ruth, no. He's my father, my real father. Maybe he's telling the truth. Maybe he really does want to take care of me." Silas turned from the gun port. "You'll get a shallow grave in some forgotten corner of this territory." Tears streamed down Ruth's face, but she did not look away. "But if I don't go, we all die." "Maybe. But at least we die on our feet, fighting, together." "That's not fair. You shouldn't have to die for me, either of you." Thomas moved to her, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. He knelt beside her, took her small face in his scarred hands. "Ruth, listen to me. You are my daughter, not because of blood, not because of biology, but because I chose you, because your mother chose me, because we became a family when the world tried to tear us apart. And I will not let that monster take you. I will not let him win." "But Papa," "No, we fight, all of us. And if we die knowing we didn't surrender. We didn't give up. We didn't let evil win, just because it was easier than fighting." Ruth threw her arms around him, sobbing into his shoulder. Thomas held her, his own tears falling silent. Silas turned back to the window. The 5 minutes were almost up. William would be moving soon, and when he did, this cabin would turn into hell. But as he watched, something caught his eye. Movement from a different direction. Not from William's position, but from the east. A single rider moving fast, coming up the trail from town. Silas's hand moved to his gun. Another enemy, reinforcements for the Canes. The rider came closer. Silas could make out details now. Young man, dark hair. Deputy's badge catching the fading sunlight. Marcus Flynn. He rode straight toward William's position, not slowing, not hesitating. Silas watched as William turned, surprise and annoyance flashing across his face. Watched as Flynn dismounted, moved close, began speaking urgently. Silas could not hear the words, but he could see William's expression changing. Surprise becoming anger. Anger becoming something else. Something that looked almost like fear. Flynn was gesturing, pointing back toward town. William was shaking his head, denying something. But Flynn pulled something from his coat, papers, documents, shoved them toward William. William grabbed them. Read. His face went white. Then he turned and looked directly at the cabin, and for the first time Silas saw uncertainty in those cold eyes. Whatever Flynn had brought it had changed the game. William barked orders. His men shifted confused. Some moved toward him. Others held position. There was argument, disagreement, the unified force fragmenting. Flynn was still talking, still pushing, and William was listening now, really listening, his confidence cracking like ice under spring sun. Inside the cabin, Thomas had noticed. What's happening? I don't know, but something changed. They watched as the discussion continued, heated, intense. Finally, William made a sharp gesture, dismissive, angry. Flynn shook his head, said something that made William's hand drop to his gun. For a moment, Silas thought Flynn was about to be shot, that this whole thing would explode into violence right here, right now. But Flynn did not back down. He pointed toward town again, spoke words that Silas could not hear but could guess at. Your brother knows, the judge knows, the evidence is already in Helena. It's over. William's shoulders sagged, just a little, just enough to show that Flynn's words had struck home. Then William did something unexpected. He cupped his hands and called out to the cabin again, but his voice was different now, less confident, more desperate. I want to talk, face to face, just you and me, Thomas. Nobody else gets hurt. I swear it. Thomas laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Your word means nothing. Then what do you want? What will it take? Silas saw the trap forming, saw what William was doing, stalling, buying time, trying to figure out how to salvage this disaster, but he also saw opportunity. I'm going out there, Silas said quietly. What? Thomas stared at him. That's suicide. Maybe, but it's also our only chance. Whatever Flynn told him, it rattled him, made him uncertain. And uncertain men make mistakes. Or they lash out, kill everything in reach. Then I die, but at least I die doing something instead of waiting for a bullet through these walls. Ruth grabbed his arm. Don't, please, stay with us. Silas knelt beside her. Ruth, I need you to trust me. Can you do that? She searched his face, looking for lies, for false promises, finding only grim determination. You're coming back. I'm going to try. Promise. He wanted to. God, he wanted to promise. But he had learned the cost of promises he could not keep. I promise I'll fight for you, for both of you. That's all I can give. It was not enough, but it was honest. Silas stood, checked his gun one last time. 6 rounds. He left his rifle behind. This was not about firepower. This was about truth. He opened the cabin door and stepped out into the dying light. The cold air hit him like a slap. He walked slowly across the clearing, hands visible, gun holstered, 20 yards, 30, 40. William watched him approach. Surprise flickered across his face. Recognition. I know you. You should. You killed my wife. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. William's eyes widened. Mercer, Silas Mercer, the marshal from Redemption Creek. Former marshal. You made sure of that when you murdered Eleanor. I didn't. William stopped himself, regrouped. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. Eleanor Mercer, schoolteacher, witness to your crimes. You had your man Garrett shoot her in the back, made it look like a robbery. You remember now? William's face had gone carefully blank. The mask of a man used to lying. You can't prove that. Actually, I can, because Sarah Whitmore saw the whole thing. She was there. She watched you murder my wife, and she wrote it all down. Every detail, every name, every crime you've committed for the past 10 years. Sarah Whitmore is dead. Yes, murdered by you, just like Eleanor, just like everyone else who got in your way. William's hand moved toward his gun, stopped. He was aware of Flynn watching, aware of his own men listening. You're making serious accusations, Mercer, without proof. The proof is in Helena by now. Flynn sent it this morning. Federal marshals are probably reading it as we speak. Your empire is over Kane. The only question left is whether you hang for murder or die here in the dirt like the animal you are. Silas saw the calculation in William's eyes, saw him weighing options, running the numbers, trying to find a way out. Then William's expression changed, hardened, the mask dropping away to reveal the monster beneath. You want to know the truth, Mercer Fine. I'll tell you the truth. Yes, I killed your wife. Yes, I killed Sarah. And I'd do it again. They were threats, loose ends, problems that needed solving. That's how the world works. The strong survive. The weak die. That's nature. The admission should have filled Silas with rage, should have made him draw his gun and end this here and now. But instead he felt something else. Clarity. Because William had just confessed in front of 30 witnesses, in front of Flynn, in front of his own men, and some of them, Silas could see, were looking uncomfortable, uncertain. Men who signed up to be deputies, not accomplices to murder. And Ruth, Silas asked quietly, what was she? Another problem that needed solving. Ruth is mine, my blood, my property. I have a right. You have no rights. You're a rapist and a murderer. And that child is not your property. She's a human being who deserves better than you. William's mask cracked further. Rage bled through. You think you're better than me? You're nothing. A broken-down drunk who couldn't protect his own wife. What gives you the right to judge me? The fact that I'm still capable of seeing the difference between right and wrong. The fact that I haven't spent my life destroying innocent people to build my own power. The fact that even broken, even lost, I'm still more of a man than you'll ever be. William drew his gun. Silas was faster. The shot echoed across the clearing like thunder. William stumbled backward, hand going to his shoulder where Silas's bullet had struck. Not a killing shot, not yet, but enough to stop him. William's men moved, guns coming up. Silas stood perfectly still, his Colt aimed at William's head, thumb on the hammer. Tell them to stand down, Silas said quietly, or the next one goes through your skull. William's face was twisted with pain and rage. You're a dead man, Mercer. We're all dead men. Question is, who dies first? For a long moment, nothing moved. The entire clearing frozen in time. 30 guns, 1 wounded sheriff, 1 man with nothing left to lose. Then a new voice cut through the tension. William, stand down. Every head turned toward the voice. A man stood at the edge of the clearing, tall. 52 years old, though the weight of authority made him seem older. Gray hair, stern features. Wearing a judge's coat and carrying himself with the bearing of someone used to being obeyed. Aldous Kane, William's older brother, the territorial judge who had enabled every crime, every cover-up, every murder. William stared at his brother. Aldous, what are you doing here, ending this? Aldous walked into the clearing slowly. His eyes moved from William to Silas to the cabin beyond. Deputy Flynn came to my chambers this afternoon, showed me documents, testimonies, evidence of crimes I was told never happened. He's lying. It's all lies. Is it? Aldous' voice was cold. Because the handwriting on these shipping manifests matches yours, William. The signatures on these falsified reports are mine, and the witness testimonies are detailed enough to hang us both 10 times over. William's face went white. You don't understand. These people, they were threats. They had to be dealt with. Dealt with. Aldous repeated the words like they tasted foul. Is that what you call murder now? Dealing with threats? You knew. You had to know you signed the death certificates. You dismissed the investigations. You protected me. I protected what I thought was justice, what I thought was maintaining order in a lawless territory. I trusted you, William, trusted that the things you told me were true, that the people who died were criminals, threats, enemies of peace. Aldous pulled something from his coat, a small leather-bound book, Sarah's diary. Silas recognized it even from across the clearing. But this, Aldous continued, his voice shaking, this tells a different story. A story of a man who used his badge to rape, to murder, to destroy anyone who stood in his way. A story of a monster I helped create by refusing to see what was right in front of me. He opened the diary, began to read, his voice carrying across the clearing in the fading light. April 15th, 1883. I watched Eleanor Mercer die tonight. Watched Sheriff Garrett shoot her in the back on William Kane's orders. She was innocent. She was good. And she died because she believed in justice. I will never forgive myself for not saving her, for being too afraid to speak. But I am writing this now so that someday someone will know the truth. Someday someone will make them pay. Aldous' voice broke. He closed the diary, looked at his brother with eyes full of something that might have been tears or might have been rage. How many, William, how many innocent people died because of you? They weren't innocent. They were... Shut up. The command was sharp, final. I don't want to hear your justifications. I don't want to hear your excuses. I just want the truth. Did you kill Eleanor Mercer? William said nothing. Did you rape Sarah Whitmore? Silence. Did you order her murder? Still. William said nothing. But his silence was answer enough. Aldous turned to Flynn. "Deputy, place my brother under arrest." Flynn stepped forward, pulling handcuffs from his belt. William's hand moved to his gun. "Don't," Silas warned, his Colt still aimed at William's head. "I'm looking for a reason. Please give me one." William's hand stopped, trembling, caught between pride and survival. Flynn reached him, began to fasten the handcuffs. William jerked away. "No, I'm not going to Helena in chains. I'm not going to hang for doing what needed to be done. I'm a sheriff. I enforce the law. I am the law in this territory." "Not anymore," Aldous said quietly. William's face twisted, all pretense gone, all masks dropped. "You're pathetic. Both of you. You think this changes anything. You think arresting me brings back the dead, restores your precious justice. It doesn't. They're still dead, still buried, still forgotten. And I'm still alive." He drew his gun. Silas fired. Flynn fired. 3 other deputies fired. William Kane fell, his body hitting the dirt with the heavy finality of a dropped stone, blood spreading beneath him in a dark pool, his eyes staring up at the sky. Empty. Gone. The clearing erupted into chaos. Men shouting, running. Some toward William's body. Some away, the unified force fragmenting completely. But Silas was not watching them. He was watching William's corpse. The man he had hunted for 3 years, dead at his feet. And he felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, just emptiness. He walked to where William had fallen, knelt beside the body not out of respect but because something had caught his eye. A leather cord around William's neck disappearing beneath his blood-soaked shirt. Silas pulled it free, a locket, small, tarnished silver. He opened it with shaking hands. Inside were 2 photographs, tiny, faded, but clear enough. On the left, a young woman, blonde, beautiful, smiling at the camera with an expression that was almost defiant. Sarah. On the right, the same woman, same face, same hair, same delicate features, but a different dress, a different background, and written beneath in careful script, "My Eleanor." Silas's world tilted. He stared at the 2 photographs, side by side, identical faces looking back at him from a dead man's locket. Not similar, not reminiscent, identical. Twins. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His hands shook so badly he nearly dropped the locket. All the pieces that had been floating, disconnected in his mind, suddenly slammed together with terrible, perfect clarity. Eleanor had told him once, in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, about her family, about the sister she had lost when they were 15, a twin sister who had run away from their abusive father and was never seen again. Eleanor had searched for years, placed advertisements in newspapers across the territory, never stopped hoping. Her sister's name had been Sarah. Silas looked toward the cabin, toward where Ruth waited with Thomas. Ruth, who had Sarah's blonde hair and delicate features. Ruth, who was William Kane's daughter by blood, which meant Ruth was Eleanor's niece, the last living piece of his wife's family. The breath left Silas's lungs in a rush. He sat back on his heels, the locket clutched in his white-knuckled fist, and for the first time in 3 years, he felt something crack open inside his chest. Not the hollow grief he had carried, not the cold rage that had sustained him, but something warmer, something that felt almost like hope. Eleanor had spent her life searching for her lost sister, had died never knowing that Sarah was alive, had died never knowing she had a niece, but Silas knew now, and Ruth was alive. Sarah's daughter, Eleanor's blood, family. He stood slowly, his legs unsteady, turned toward the cabin, saw Ruth standing in the doorway, small and frightened, watching the chaos in the clearing. Not just a child he had promised to protect, not just an innocent caught in a corrupt system, but family, the last piece of Eleanor that still walked and breathed and lived. Flynn appeared beside him. "Mercer, you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." Silas looked at the locket in his hand, at the 2 faces that were one face, at the truth he should have seen sooner but had been too broken to recognize. "I just found out," he said quietly, "that I've been fighting for my family this whole time. I just didn't know it." Flynn looked confused. "What?" But Silas was already walking toward the cabin, toward Ruth, his steps growing faster, more certain. When he reached her, he knelt down, opened the locket, showed her the photographs. "Do you know who this is?" He pointed to the right side. "To Eleanor." Ruth studied it carefully. "No, but she looks like Mama." "Her name was Eleanor. Eleanor Mercer. She was my wife, and she was your mother's twin sister." Ruth's eyes went wide. "Twin, your mother had a sister she lost when they were young, a sister she never stopped looking for, and that sister was the woman I married, the woman the Canes killed 3 years ago." Tears spilled down Ruth's cheeks. "So you and Mama, you were family." "We were. We just never knew it." Silas's voice cracked. "Eleanor died searching for her sister, never knowing she was so close, never knowing she had a niece." Ruth threw her arms around him, sobbing. "Does that mean we're family too?" Silas held her tight, his own tears falling silent. 3 years of grief and rage and emptiness, finally finding an outlet, a purpose, a reason. "Yes," he whispered into her hair, "you're my niece, my family. The last piece of Eleanor I have left in this world, and I swear to you I will never let anyone hurt you again. Not the Canes, not anyone. You're mine now, mine to protect, mine to raise, mine to love. Promise." He thought about all the promises he had broken, all the ways he had failed. But this time, with this child, with this last precious piece of his wife, he would not fail. "I promise. On Eleanor's memory, on your mother's memory, on everything I have left. You are my daughter now, and I will die before I let anything happen to you." Ruth clung to him, and Silas realized that somewhere in the process of trying to save her, she had saved him too, had given him back his humanity, his purpose, his heart. Thomas appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily against the frame. He had heard everything. His face was pale, but his eyes were knowing. "That's why you stayed," Thomas said quietly. "Even before you knew. Something in you recognized her, recognized Eleanor in her." "Maybe," Silas stood Ruth still in his arms, "or maybe Eleanor guided me here, made sure I'd be in the right place at the right time, made sure her sister's daughter wouldn't be alone." He looked down at Ruth, at the child who was his niece, his family, his second chance. "Either way, I'm not leaving. Not ever again." Aldous approached slowly, his face showing the weight of what he had witnessed, what he had done. "I'm sorry, for your wife, for Sarah, for all of it. I should have seen, should have known, should have stopped him years ago." "Yes," Silas said simply, "you should have." "That doesn't make it better." "No, it doesn't." Aldous looked toward where Ruth held tight to Silas. "The child, Ruth. She's really William's daughter. By blood, not by choice. Thomas Whitmore raised her, protected her, loved her. That makes him her real father. And the charges against him? The murder of Jacob Hartley. Self-defense. He was protecting Ruth from an abusive drunk who was trying to kill her. The same way you just protected yourselves from William." Aldous considered this. The clearing had grown quieter now. Most of William's men had scattered. The few who remained were gathering around Flynn, waiting for orders. "I'll need statements," Aldous said finally. "From Thomas, from the girl, from you, a full accounting of everything that happened. And then I'll render judgment, as is my duty." Aldous' eyes met his. "I cannot undo the past Marshal Mercer. I cannot bring back your wife or Sarah Whitmore or any of the others my brother destroyed. But I can try to ensure that justice, however delayed, is finally served." It was not enough. Could never be enough. But it was something. Flynn came to the cabin an hour later, knocked politely, entered when Thomas called permission. "Judge Kane wants to speak with you. Tomorrow, in town. He's promised safe conduct." "Men, can we trust him?" Thomas asked. Flynn hesitated. "He's a complicated man, enabled terrible things, but I think in his own way he's trying to make amends. The diary broke something in him, seeing his brother's crimes laid out in black and white. He's not the same man he was this morning." "None of us are," Silas said quietly. Flynn nodded. "There will be questions, investigations, trials probably. This is going to get messy before it gets clean, but the worst is over. The Kane Empire is done. William is dead. Aldous is cooperating. The evidence is in Helena. Real lawmen are coming. And Thomas?" Ruth's voice was small. "Will they arrest him?" "Aldous believes his claim of self-defense. With Sarah's diary supporting it with the evidence of Jacob's abuse, I think the charges will be dismissed. But it has to go through proper channels, has to be official. Thomas closed his eyes. Relief or despair, Silas could not tell. Maybe both. Flynn turned to leave. Stopped at the door. For what it's worth, I'm sorry, for not speaking up sooner, for being part of it for so long. I thought I was helping maintain order. Turns out, I was just helping maintain evil. You spoke up in the end, Silas said. That's more than most men do. Is it enough? I don't know. Ask me in 10 years. Flynn left. The cabin fell silent again. Silas watched Ruth curl up next to Thomas on the bed, watched the man wrap his arms around the child. Two people who had lost everything but each other. Two people who had survived because they refused to give up. Family, not by blood, not by law, but by choice, by sacrifice, by love. The days that followed blurred together. The trip to town, the long interview with Judge Aldous, who sat across from them in his chambers and asked questions with the hollow-eyed intensity of a man examining his own failures, the statements, the paperwork, the slow grinding machinery of justice finally belatedly turning toward truth. Thomas's charges were dismissed on the third day. Self-defense, justified use of force. The record cleared, but the physical damage was done. His wounds, reopened by stress and exertion, had gotten worse. Infection had set in despite Silas's best efforts. The town doctor shook his head gravely. He needs rest, real rest. Weeks of it, maybe months, and even then, he did not finish the sentence. Did not need to. Thomas knew. Silas knew. And Ruth, with her terrible certainty, knew too. They moved Thomas to a room above the general store. The owner, an old woman who remembered Sarah from before everything went wrong, offered it free of charge. "Least I can do," she said quietly. "I failed to help sooner." Thomas lasted 2 more weeks. He spent them teaching Ruth everything he could. How to manage money, how to negotiate with merchants, how to read contracts and avoid being cheated. How to stand up for herself in a world that would try to make her small. "You're smarter than most adults I know," he told her one evening. "Braver too. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Ruth held his hand. "I don't want to be brave. I just want you to get better." "I know, sweetheart, but that's not how this works." Silas sat with them every day, not speaking much, just being present, a steady reminder that Ruth would not be alone when the inevitable came. On the 14th day, Thomas's fever spiked. His breathing became labored. The doctor came, administered laudanum for the pain, and quietly told Silas to prepare. That night, as winter's first snow began to fall outside the window, Thomas called them both close. "Ruth, my beautiful girl, I need you to listen." She was crying, had been crying for hours, but she nodded. "I loved your mother more than I thought it was possible to love another person, and I love you just as much. You gave meaning to my life when I thought I'd lost everything. You made me a father, made me whole, and I will carry that with me wherever I'm going. Don't go. Please don't go." "I don't have a choice, sweetheart, but you do. You can choose to let this destroy you, or you can choose to live. Really live. For both of us, for your mother, for everyone who loved you." He turned his head toward Silas. "Take care of her, please. She's all that's left." "I will. Promise me, really promise. Not the careful kind where you leave yourself room to fail. Promise me you'll protect her, raise her, give her the life she deserves." Silas thought about promises, about Eleanor, about 3 years of running from failure, about this moment right here, right now, where he could choose to run again or choose to stand. "I promise. She's my family now, my responsibility, my daughter." The words felt right, true, like something that had always been meant to happen finally clicking into place. Thomas smiled, a real smile, peaceful. "Good. That's good." He looked back at Ruth, touched her face one last time. Tell Ruth that I loved her mother, and I loved her enough to die knowing she's safe." They were almost the same words he had spoken to Silas 2 weeks ago, as though he had been preparing for this ending all along. Ruth sobbed into his chest. Thomas's hand moved to her hair, stroking gently, comforting even as his own life slipped away. "Be brave, little one. Be strong. Be everything I know you can be." His eyes closed. His breathing slowed. And as the snow continued to fall outside, as the world turned white and clean, Thomas Whitmore stopped breathing. Ruth's scream shattered the quiet. Silas held her as she wept, held her through the night, held her as the doctor came to confirm what they already knew, held her as dawn broke and the town woke to the news. One more good man gone, one more casualty of the Kane Empire's cruelty. But not the last witness. Ruth survived, and in surviving, she carried the truth forward. 6 months later, Silas Mercer stood in a small cemetery on the outskirts of a town that was learning to be better than it had been. 2 graves side by side, fresh earth, simple headstones. Eleanor Mercer, beloved wife, champion of justice; Sarah Whitmore, loving mother, sister, truth-teller. Aldous Kane had arranged for Sarah's body to be moved from its lonely grave, had arranged for Eleanor's as well. The sisters reunited at last, together in death as they should have been in life. A 3rd grave lay nearby, smaller stone, simpler words. Thomas Whitmore, protector, father, hero. Ruth placed flowers on all 3 graves, wildflowers she had picked that morning from the meadow where she and Silas now lived. A small farm on the Canadian border. Safe, quiet, far from the memories, but close enough to visit when needed. "Do you think they're together now?" Ruth asked. The same question she had asked 6 months ago in the cabin. "I know they are," Silas said, "and they're watching over us." Ruth slipped her hand into his, so much smaller than his own. So fragile, but strong too, stronger than she knew. They stood together in the cemetery. The man who had learned to live again, the child who had become the keeper of truth, the last witness to crimes that would not be forgotten. Behind them, the town of Blackwater Falls continued its slow transformation. Judge Aldous Kane had resigned his position, turned himself over to the territorial authorities. He would likely spend the rest of his life in prison, paying for his complicity. Flynn had been appointed interim sheriff, working to rebuild the law enforcement that had been corrupted for so long. It was not perfect, not even close. But it was better. The wind moved across the cemetery, carrying the scent of spring flowers and new grass, carrying whispers of justice delayed but not denied, carrying the promise that even in darkness, even when all seems lost, there are still people willing to stand, to fight, to keep promises. Ruth looked up at Silas. "Can we go home now?" Home. Such a simple word. Such a powerful one. "Yeah," Silas said softly. "Let's go home." They walked away from the graves, away from the past, toward the small farm where they were building something new, not a replacement for what they had lost. Nothing could replace that, but something worthwhile nonetheless. A family forged in tragedy, tempered by loss, made stronger by the choice to keep going when giving up would have been easier. As they reached the cemetery gate, Ruth stopped, looked back one more time. "I won't forget them," she said quietly. "Any of them. I'll carry their stories, tell their truth, make sure people remember." "I know you will." "Will you help me?" Silas thought about Eleanor, about the promise he had failed to keep 3 years ago, about the promise he was keeping now. "Every day," he said, "for as long as I live." They walked into the future together, the last witness and her protector, carrying the weight of memory, bearing the burden of truth. Living proof that even in a world bent toward darkness, even when justice seems impossible, there are still those who remember, who fight, who refuse to let the innocent be forgotten. And somewhere above, in whatever place the dead go, when their stories are finished, Eleanor and Sarah and Thomas watched over them with pride and love and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that their sacrifices had not been in vain. The wind whispered through the mountains, across the plains, through the forests where a small cabin still stood empty now, but not forgotten. It whispered of endings and beginnings, of justice found and debts paid, of promises kept and families made. And in that whisper, if you listened closely enough, you could hear the echo of a child's desperate plea that had changed everything. "Please follow me home," not a plea for rescue, but an invitation to remember what it meant to be human, to care, to fight for those who could not fight for themselves. Silas Mercer had followed a child home 6 months ago, and in doing so, he had found his way back to himself. The last witness would carry the truth forward, and the man who learned to live again would make sure she never had to carry it alone. The end of one story, the beginning of another. the way of all things in a world that kept turning, kept hoping, kept reaching for light even in the deepest darkness. And as the sun set over the Montana Territory, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, two figures walked hand in hand toward home, toward healing, toward tomorrow, together. The end.